Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Thursday, January 25th slate of college basketball DFS on DraftKings as well as FanDuel. We took a brief little hiatus this week, but we are back coming at you breaking down this college basketball slate for Thursday. And the plan is to be back for the Friday slate as well as the Saturday slate as well as the Sunday slate this week. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel as well as subscribe to the audio feed. That way you can be notified when episodes drop and you can be with us for the rest of our content for the rest of college basketball season, as well as the rest of PGA Tour golf season and NFL season as well. Now, if you were wondering where we were yesterday, because there was no episode for Wednesday, pretty much, let me think the best way to explain this. So it happened just to be so that there was a lot going on in my household this week. So my daughter is now 4 months old, and I don't know if any of you have had kids who have heard this term, but we were introduced to what is known as 4-month sleep regression this week, where apparently it's a thing according to our doctors, and it's just when your baby just kind of forgets how to sleep for an indeterminate amount of time when they get to 4 months old. Either they forget how to sleep or they just don't want to sleep, and so since she is not sleeping, I have not been sleeping, and I've been spending my nights trying to put her to sleep. And there's just no way I can do the research and recording that I need to if I've got her in my hand trying to, rock her to sleep all night. So that has been going on. And then also I started a new semester of school this week. I've mentioned here before, I'm a high school math teacher as well as football coach. And so I started a new semester at school this week where we got brand new students. And I don't know if y'all know this or not, but there's a secret to teaching where if you're really hard and really vigilant the first week, they don't try to take advantage of you after that. So I have really been trying to be on it at school. So all my time that I'm not spent rocking Ava is spent trying to get my own sleep and get my own energy levels back up to focus on school. So just haven't had time to focus on college basketball for Wednesday. So good news is, we're back for Thursday. I had time to do the research for this little 4-game slate, so we're going to break it down game by game and tell you who you need to be looking at for your DraftKings lineups, as well as which games and which situations you need to be targeting for those DraftKings lineups. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and start with the breakdown with game number 1. The first game on the slate is the battle in the American Athletic Conference, SMU heading to Denton to take on North Texas. I feel like this should be called like the battle for Dallas or something, because you got SMU, the team from, pretty much downtown Dallas, and then North Texas, suburban Dallas. So I feel like there's got to be some kind of rivalry there, right? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But anyway, it is SMU taking on North Texas, and it is by far the ugliest game of the slate. KenPom has this one projected to be 63-62 in favor of North Texas for a total of 125, which makes it the lowest total on the slate by about almost 20 points. Now, if you're wondering the reason why, it's because North Texas ranks dead last in adjusted tempo in the nation, according to KenPom. Yes, dead last. And if you're curious, yes, they were dead last year too. But the interesting part is Grant McCasland, who was their head coach, went to Texas Tech, and they promoted a new head coach. And guess what? They are still dead last in the nation in tempo. It makes them one of the hardest teams to target in DFS. Only one of their last 5 games featured a total that ended at over 130 points. So in all likelihood, this is not going to be a high-scoring game because North Texas is in it, which is bad news for SMU. However, what we do need to monitor for SMU, and I'm not saying that nobody from this game can hit value, because the price tags in this game aren't that unreasonable. So for SMU, there are a few guys that I would consider. It is official. Chuck Harris has officially taken over the lead dog role from Zurich Phelps. He has outscored him in fantasy scoring in 3 games in a row now, and he's also had a higher average usage rate in all 3 of those games. In fact, Chuck Harris has been over 31 fantasy points in all 3 of those games. So I don't think Chuck Harris is a bad play at all. But again, the game flow is the issue. At a salary of $7,100, you're going to need about 29 fantasy points just to get 4x value, and you're really looking for more than that if you're playing GPPs. So I think it's going to be kind of tough for him to get there in a poor game environment. The interesting thing is with Chuck Harris is that his fantasy scoring has kind of come on the heels of a lot of assists, and it's really hard to get assists when your team's not scoring a whole lot of buckets. So that gives me a little bit of cause of concern, but I'm not ruling out the possibility of him getting there Thursday night. Now, the other guy that I would be interested in on this team would be Jalen Smith. He's only $4,200 on DraftKings, and the reason why is because he's only $4,200 on DraftKings. When you're at that cheap of a price, you don't need as much fantasy scoring to hit value. So in a game environment that's going to be poor, that's going to be slow, that's not going to feature a whole lot of scoring, he just doesn't have to get as many to hit value. And he's played between 22 and 25 minutes in the last 4 games, and he scored between 15 and 24 fantasy points in the last 4 games. At a salary of $4,200, I think he could could definitely get to 18, which is kind of what you would want. But I'm really not interested in a whole lot of anybody else on this SMU side. Now, North Texas, I'm a little more interested in for two reasons. One, they're used to playing at this tempo. This is not a pace down spot for them. All of their games are rock fights like this one is going to be. And what's also intriguing about North Texas is that they've played without Reuben Jones for the last 4 games, and we haven't really gotten any news of when he's going to return. We just know it's a hamstring injury, and you don't really play around with those. So if he continues to be out, you can expect their usage to kind of continue to trend in the same way that it has while he's been out, and I think that him being out opens up a little bit of value. Since he has been out in those 4 games, Aaron Scott, who gets dual eligibility, has averaged about 27 fantasy points per game. That's not bad. He's taken at least 11 shots in all 4 of those games. And then the guy I would prefer, though, would be Jason Edwards, who has scored let me rephrase, he has averaged about 30 fantasy points per game in those last 4 games. He's taken at least 15 shots in all 4 of those games, and one of those games was over 40 fantasy points. So Jason Edwards does have a little bit of a ceiling. The only thing that concerns me just a little bit is that he doesn't do a whole lot outside of scoring, but again, he's only $6,200. He's at a very reasonable price tag, and that usage has been sky high with no Reuben Jones. CJ Nolan has also been pretty good without Reuben Jones in the lineup. He's averaged about 20 fantasy points per game in the last 4, double-digit shots in all 4 of those games, which pretty much those 3 guys are taking almost all the shots for this North Texas team right now. The other guy that's interesting is Robert Allen, not because he's been taking a whole lot of shots, but he has been cleaning the glass like Windex in the last 4 games in the absence of Reuben Jones. He has scored at least 21 fantasy points in all 4 of those games, and he's averaged about 26.5 over that span. So Robert Allen is definitely a guy that I'm interested in if Reuben Jones continues to sit. I'm going to be honest, I think Edwards and Allen are objectively the 2 best plays from this game as long as Reuben Jones is out, and if he's back, I'm probably just going to be crossing this game off altogether and pretty much just starting the slate at 9 p.m. Next up is going to be San Francisco taking on Gonzaga, the battle in the West Coast Conference. This is a pretty good game in my opinion. This San Francisco team is like kind of sneaky good, and I think this Gonzaga team is kind of like sneaky not so good. KenPom has this one projected to be Gonzaga 78-69. KenPom also loves Gonzaga, which I'm still trying to if you tinker with KenPom enough, you can figure out why they love certain teams. Gonzaga has a lot of good losses, and so I don't know how good Gonzaga actually is, but I think that 9-point number for KenPom is a little bit higher than I would have projected it. So anyway, 78-69 in favor of the Zags. Let's look at the San Francisco side. So over the course of the season, they have been a 3-man team in terms of their usage, with Jonathan Mabo, Marcus Williams, and Mongolian Mike Sharvjomps as their 3 lead guys. But as time has gone on, what you have seen is Mabo and Williams have been pretty consistent, but Sharvjomps' usage has gone by the wayside just a little bit, and it's gone in favor of Malik Thomas as well as Ryan Beasley. And so what's kind of happened over the last few games, if you look at their game logs, is just one of those 3 guys ends up going off. And I don't think that means that you can't play him, but I wouldn't play that situation in cash games. I wouldn't. It just seems like one of those 3 guys is bound to go off, but they're not going to go off together. And you're not going to be looking at a situation at the end of the night where 2 of them break the slate or something like that. So I don't mind playing any of those 3 guys, but there are the 3 key guys for San Francisco that I'm interested in are Mabo, Williams, and Newberry. Let's break down why. So Marcus Williams is their point guard. He generally gets a ton of shots, and he has legitimate ceiling. He's had multiple 38 fantasy point performances this season. I don't think he's a bad play at all. Ndueto Newberry is their starting power forward right now, and he has shown a ceiling recently. He's had 2 of his last 4 games over 35 fantasy points. They kind of came out of nowhere, though, but just know that the ceiling is there, and with Gonzaga being a little bit of a bigger lineup, more on that in a second, Newberry is definitely going to be asked to play big minutes against this Gonzaga front court. But the guy that we got to talk about is their best player, Jonathan Mabo. So I've been told that the G is silent, and it's just Jonathan Mabo. That's what I've been told. So that's what I'm going to go with, okay? If I'm mispronouncing that, please correct me so that way I don't sound like a moron for the rest of the season, because I think San Francisco is going to pop up on some more slates. So Jonathan Mabo He's a really good player. He's really athletic. He kind of runs a little bit of point forward for them. Like he'll just get a rebound and just start going coast to coast. He's really fun to watch. He's an NBA prospect, legitimately. And he's $9,600 here on DraftKings. And that puts him at a big time dilemma because if you look at the slate as a whole, he is the most expensive player by $1,500 on the entire slate. That makes him very difficult to squeeze into lineups. And there's not a whole lot of obvious value on this slate. So I don't think a whole lot of people are going to play Jonathan Mabo. I also think a lot of people are going to look at Gonzaga and be like, oh, that's a tough matchup for bigs. Maybe I can just pass on Jonathan Mabo and not spend up for him. To me, that's okay because that's going to decrease ownership. I'm not saying I'm going to be playing him in like every single lineup because I don't think there's enough value to do that. But he's definitely a guy who's going to make my player pool because he has legitimate upside. 3 of his last 4 games, actually, let me make it bigger than that. All of his last, let me rephrase, 5 of his last 6 games. There we go. 5 of his last 6 games have been over 44 fantasy points or more, including a ceiling of 62.5 in that span. This is a guy who can rack up fantasy points in a multitude of ways with scoring, rebounding, and assisting. And this game against Gonzaga is a pace-up spot for San Francisco. It would not shock me to see him put up 50 to 60 fantasy points in this one. Just know that you're putting a hamstring on the rest of your lineup just by playing a guy at that salary. It's going to be, I think a lot of people are not going to play him because of that reason. And so I will absolutely play a low-owned Jonathan Mabo here on this slate. All right, that does it for the first 2 games. Let's take a quick breather, and then we'll break down the later 2. Most importantly, because the later 2 games are the 2 that are on the FanDuel slate for Thursday. So, we're going to kind of look at it from a DraftKings and FanDuel's perspective, but let's take a quick breather first. Now, before we get started with the final 2 games, I do want to mention there are a few places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I tweet out any updates for the show on there, and I'm more than happy to answer any lineup questions that you might have if you reach out to me on Twitter. Second, I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Basically, the Fantasy Corner Discord is a lot of people who play a lot of DFS for a lot of different sports, and pretty much all day we're in there for college basketball, NBA, golf, NFL, and just talking it up and going over plays and strategy. And if you're somebody who struggles with late swapping, we have a lot of people in there who are really good at getting information out in terms of starting lineups and injury news. And so that is one place you can go to kind of get a little bit of help with that. There's a lot of smart people in there who can help you get better at college basketball DFS, and it's just a fun community to be part of because we're sweating it out pretty much every night, and a lot of members of the Discord have had some big wins recently. Lastly, you can also read my articles on my Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. Basically, what the Patreon does is I basically write my entire strategy for the slate on the Patreon on a daily basis, where I highlight my core plays as well as just generally my lineup strategy and my attack strategy for the slate, basically to just kind of give an overview of who I'm playing, why I'm playing them, and what spots I think are attackable tonight. And I think that that's a lot of information that can help you build your strategy and build your lineups as you play college basketball DFS. All right, now let's go ahead and break down the last 2 games. So one thing that I noticed outright was, these 2 are the only 2 on the FanDuel slate, and they are very tough to find value. Like there's just not a whole lot of cheap plays in any of these games that get a whole lot of interest from me. That's just my personal opinion. So the first game is going to be Arizona State heading to Oregon. KenPom has this one projected to finish 77-70 in favor of the Ducks. Now on the Arizona State side, the one thing that is good news is they have pretty much just gone to a 6-man rotation where it's Frankie Collins running point, Adam Miller, Jose Perez on the wings, Jemiah Neal as their small ball 4, and then Alonzo Gaffney starts at the 5. But you have Bryant Selabang coming off the bench, and he's kind of playing more minutes than Gaffney. Like they're kind of split and almost dead even down the middle, and Selabang played a little bit more in the last game. So that's kind of just the 6 guys that they're playing, right? They're not really playing anybody else a whole lot of substantial minutes. I mean, Kamari Lands will play a little bit. Sean Phillips Jr. will play a little bit, but like they're not major factors in this rotation. So that's the kind of good piece of news is where the production is going to come from for this Arizona State team. But when you get to trying to figure out which one of those six guys it's going to be, that's when it starts to get tough. So when you look at it, Adam Miller and Jose Perez, they're kind of similar players where they're pretty shot dependent. They can go really hot or really cold, and they kind of seem to alternate games where they go off. So which one is it going to be this time? I don't know, but it would not shock me at the end of the night if one of those two guys is breaking the slate. If you play multiple lineups, it would probably be wise, I think, to sprinkle both of them in. I don't really have a lean one way or the other. I guess the tiebreaker would be the price tag, so I would probably be more likely to play Adam. Frankie Collins, though, he's their point guard. He runs the show. He has been super consistent. He has been 6 straight games over 25 fantasy points, and of those 6 games, 3 of them have been over 43 fantasy points. So he has a legitimate ceiling and floor. That's what we like to see. He's taken at least 11 shots in the last 5 games as well. So just really consistent option. Not a bad matchup against Oregon. Frankie Collins is a guy that you definitely got to consider, and on the FanDuel slate, he's definitely a guy that I'm going to be looking for my lineups. Now, after him, Jemiah Neal has been really solid lately as well. I think it's pronounced Jemiah. It might be Jamia, but I'm going to say Jemiah. So Jemiah Neal has had 26 fantasy points or more in 4 straight games. This small ball 4 role that he's been playing has been working really well because he's been really crashing the boards. And so that is one way I think you can target him. And I think he is a totally viable player here on the slate, and he gets dual eligibility. So he's pretty easy to fit in. Bryant Selbang is also, I think, a decent value play. He kind of just comes out of nowhere to have big games. Like 2 of his last 4 games, he's been over 20 fantasy points, one of which was 31. And in that game, he did outplay Alonzo Gaffney. Will that continue? I don't know, but it certainly happened last game. I certainly think that makes him in play as a value play. And then Gaffney, I think, is in play as well. Gaffney getting the slight minutes edge to Selbang. I was a little off on that one earlier. Gaffney is getting the slight minutes edge, but Selbang was more productive in the last game. Yeah, I misread my note. Gaffney is the one getting a little bit more minutes, but Selbang definitely did have the better last game. Now, let's go ahead and flip on over to the Oregon side. So everything with Oregon, and I think this guy's going to be one of the most popular plays on the slate. Everything with Oregon revolves around N'Faly Dante. So if you're not familiar with his story, he was Oregon's primary big man last season, or one of their primary big men last season. And he started off the season with a 49 fantasy point performance against Georgia, which was great, but he hurt himself. And he did not play again until January 13th against Cal, where he came off the bench. And then he started last week against Colorado, last Thursday to be exact, put up 21 fantasy points. And then he started on Sunday against Utah, played a full 29-minute workload, and put up 51 fantasy points. So if you were following along, he's played 4 games, started 3 of them. 2 of them, he's been over 20 minutes. In the 2 games he's played over 20 minutes, he scored 49 and 51 fantasy points. That's an incredible ceiling for a guy at $7,700. Now, do I think he's going to do that again? Probably not, but does he need to do that again? The answer is no. If he gives you 40 fantasy points, that's over 5x value, and you got to be happy. And that's 80% of what he did in his last game. So I'm really high on N'Faly Dante. I think he's going to be one of the most popular plays on the slate on DraftKings. FanDuel was really wise to it, and they made him the highest priced player on the slate. Good for you, FanDuel, for being aware of what this guy is doing. I think that makes him a little tougher to play because, like I said, the value on this FanDuel slate is really scarce, but I do think he might be worth it. Now, after N'Faly Dante, we got to talk about the other guys who are playing solid minutes, because what Dana Altman's doing right now is he doesn't really know who his reliable guys are just yet, which is not a good sign at this point in the season. So 4 guys played over 24 minutes in their last game. However, 10 saw the floor. So the guys that played over 24 minutes, we've already talked about N'Faly Dante. The other 3 are Jackson Shellstat, Jermaine Cousinard, and Brennan Rigsby. Kwame Evans Jr. is basically like a non-factor with N'Faly Dante back, so I would cross him off the list. Nate Biddle is returning from injury also, like N'Faly Dante, and he played 1 minute in their last 2 games combined, so I would cross him off the list as well. Bartholomew and Okendo are going to play minutes, but it's super inconsistent. You don't know what you're going to get from them. But like I said, those 4, Dante, Cousinard, Shellstat, and Rigsby, those are the guys that are playing the minutes. Now, among those, who might you want? Well, Cousinard would probably get the edge to me over the other 2 guards. He's been pretty darn consistent. He had a 26% usage rate in their last game, even with N'Faly Dante back, and he put up 43 fantasy points in that game as well. So what I like about that is he's shown the ability to score a lot of fantasy points with N'Faly Dante in the lineup. So it's not really affecting him that N'Faly Dante is going to be there. And that's really what I like with with Cousinard at that price tag of only $7,500, he can absolutely get you 5x value. Now, I would consider Jadrian Tracy. He started last game against Utah, but he got caught in foul trouble, and he only played 18 minutes, only put up 7 fantasy points. But he had been seeing a pretty consistent minute load before then. 3 of the previous 5 games before last game, he had been over 18 fantasy points, which is pretty good at a salary of $4,600. So he is a guy that I would consider. And like I said, on a slate where value is pretty scarce, a guy that's $4,600 and is likely to get you 18 fantasy points is not a bad option. Next up, we got our last game of the night, which is going to be Arizona taking on Oregon State. This is projected to be the most lopsided game on the slate. KenPom has this one projected to finish as 84-67 in favor of Arizona. That's a 17-point spread, and it makes Arizona the highest team total on the slate. So look, this could be a close game, or it could be blowout city. So we don't really know what to expect. I would tend to think it's going to be closer to blowout city, in my opinion, because Oregon State is reeling right now. More on them in a second. But for Arizona, in a close game, what they have shown over the last few weeks is that Umar Ballo, Pelle Larson, and Caleb Love are the only 3 that are going to play 30-plus minutes. All the other pieces are going to rotate in and out, but Love, Ballo, and Larson are their 3 guys. So if you think this game is going to be close, play 1 or 2 of those guys because they're going to be the ones on the floor. They're going to be the ones getting the shots. Now, Caleb Love is interesting. And, I've got a group chat with my buddies where we talk about Prize Picks and Underdog. And one of them loves to do the Caleb Love under assists because the impression of Caleb Love is that he doesn't pass a whole lot. However, I have learned over the years that you never try to predict what Caleb Love is going to do. He is just an unpredictable specimen. You don't really know what you're going to get. But what you do have is 45 fantasy point upside. And so I think Caleb Love makes for a great GPP option. Would I touch him in cash? Absolutely not, because I don't think there's any kind of consistency there to what he does. But I think that he is a guy who has immense upside. Umar Ballo, as the big, has to have interest from me in this game, as does Kashad Johnson. The reason why is because Oregon State has been super vulnerable to big men. If you look at their box scores recently, in back-to-back games, Keon Brooks of Washington, Maxime Reynaud of Stanford, Keba Keita of Utah, and Tristan DeSilva of Colorado have all gone off against this Oregon State front court. And so it would stand to reason that Ballo and Johnson are going to be able to go off against this Oregon State front court as well. Now, another variable that you have to consider, though, is that if this game turns into a blowout, what you tend to get is extended run from Jaden Bradley, Moteus Krivas, I hope I said that right, and KJ Lewis. Krivas is the guy that would be taking advantage of the front court. We have seen him go off in blowouts before, especially against teams that are kind of weaker on the front court, right? So Krivas is a value play that I would definitely be considering, but it would be on the caveat that Arizona wins in a blowout. So, I would construct my lineup around Arizona winning in a blowout if I'm playing Krivas. So, I wouldn't necessarily play 4 Arizona guys in that situation. I would definitely wouldn't play an Oregon State guy in that situation. And that would just kind of be how I would approach it. When on a 4-game slate, you can definitely build your lineup around a narrative. Now, the last team we get to talk about on the day is Oregon State. And look, this is a team that is in flux right now. They switched up their starting lineup big time in their last game. They moved big man Thomas Nadong into it, and he only played 12 minutes, and he only put up 4 fantasy points. Even if he starts again, I'm not really seeing a whole lot of upside. He put up 21 fantasy points back in November against Troy when a lot of guys were hurt, but he hasn't put up more than 11 fantasy points in conference play, so it's kind of hard to get behind him, even if he does end up starting. If you're playing 20 max GPPs, do I think you could play one lineup with Thomas and Dog? Probably, but he's just a guy that I'm really probably not considering, and I just wanted to bring it up that they did move him into the starting lineup. So if you see the starting lineup tomorrow and it has him in it, don't be surprised. However, they did not play well in that game, so don't be surprised if it changes up also, because they got beat by 33 by Colorado. Now, what that also did was you saw reduced minutes for Casey Abikwe, who had been starting at the center position for Oregon State. He only played 7 minutes against Colorado. He's okay. He has some upside games. Usually comes when he blocks some shots, but I don't think it's very likely up against Umar Ballo and the rest of the Arizona front court. Michael Rataj came off the bench and played 27 minutes and he went over 4x. He had 23 fantasy points. I think he's probably price per or like points per dollar the best play on this Oregon State team. He's only $5,400. He's shown a legitimate ceiling, and he's shown that he is going to play a lot of minutes. What he does with them is up to him. And like I said, price points per dollar. Why do I want to say price? Points per dollar. I think he's the best play on this Oregon State side. Josiah Lake also came off the bench in that game, and he played 28 minutes and put up 17 fantasy points. Might that have been because it was a massive blowout? Quite possibly. So, again, on a slate that's like really bereft of a lot of value, he's a guy that I'll consider for my player pool, but probably won't be playing a lot of. The last interesting thing that they did in their starting lineup and their rotations was they moved Dexter Akana, who had kind of been like their gunner off the bench. They moved him into the starting lineup. He played 18 minutes. He was 0 for 6 from the field, and he put up 3.5 fantasy points. It was just a disaster for Oregon State against Colorado. Let's call it what it is. And so I don't really necessarily think he's a great play, but he's a guy that does like to shoot the ball. And then Justin Rochelin also started in that game against Colorado, played 13 minutes, put up 5.5 fantasy points. Again, do I think they're necessarily going to start the same starting five again? Maybe, maybe not, because that game was such an abject disaster. Do I think that you can also paint the entire picture of this starting five from that game? Probably not, because that game was such an abject disaster. So I don't really know what to expect from a lot of the value plays on Oregon State. I think they're worth dart throws. Like if you're playing 20 lineups, you can sprinkle in a little bit of Lake, a little bit of Akano, a little bit of Garashwan, maybe a lineup of Nadong. But Rataj would be the guy that I would play the most of. And at the top of this team, look, if you think they keep this game close, it's going to be because of Pope or Bilodeau, because they have been their two best players the entire season long. Jordan Pope averages almost 4x for his current salary. He's been, kind of had two duds the last two games, but they've been blowouts where Oregon State as a whole didn't play well. So I would be willing to go back to him because he does have a few 40 fantasy point performances earlier in the season. Tyler Bilodeau is their most consistent forward option. He tends to get a lot of shots. Everything else can kind of be up and down inconsistent, but it's $6,500 in a game against Arizona, who's really going to push the pace. I don't think that's a terrible option. All right, that does it for the college basketball Thursday, January 25th DFS slate for DraftKings as well as FanDuel. So hopefully was able to give you guys plenty of information that you can use to build some winning lineups for this Thursday slate. Remember, hit the subscribe button. That way you can be back for the Friday slate as well as the rest of college basketball season. And if you like what you saw here in this video, please hit the like button and please rate and review the audio feed as well. Y'all, I promise it really does help me out a ton when you guys like the video and when you rate and review the audio. I cannot stress that enough how much it helps me out, and I really appreciate it. You guys are the best. Remember, if you want more from me, follow me on Twitter, join the Fantasy Corner Discord. Articles are on the Patreon if you want to see who actually makes the cut for my lineups. All right, so that brings us to the end of the episode, guys. So best of luck to you guys on the Thursday DFS slate. Thank you guys for watching and listening, and I will see you next time.